My name is Randy Ruta. I'm the CEO of the National Health Council, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this afternoon to a really exciting opportunity to have a conversation with thought leaders in the medical device and technology space. This is a webinar intended to really feature these member organizations of the National Health Council that are doing such important work every day on behalf of our patients and their families across the country. When you think about medical devices and technology and the role that these innovations play in people's health, the diagnostics, the treatment, the ongoing support as people manage their chronic conditions and disabilities, complex conditions, there's no better sector that's contributing to the health and well-being of our collective constituencies than the individuals that'll be speaking with us here today. I want to mention some housekeeping. You see that on the screen. The webinar is being recorded and we will post it so that those who are not able to join us today have an opportunity to benefit from our speakers' knowledge. Everybody except the speakers will be on mute. If you have any questions for speakers, I would ask you to put those questions and comments in the chat function, and I will do my best to try to sift through the chat and invite you to ask your question or make your comment. Certainly, if you have any questions about the Zoom links or technical issues, please quickly email our National Health Council team and we'll help you in that space. It's a real pleasure for me to have the speakers that are here with us today. What we'll do is have a very brief introduction for myself, really just to kick off this session. And then I will ask each of the speakers, really the leadership from the Medical Device and Technology Associations, both AdvaMed, MDIC, and our Manufacturers Association leaders from those three organizations will be joining us today. We'll have a few minutes for questions after they make their presentations. And then we'll move into three member organizations that I couldn't be more excited about having you meet today. That would be Edwards Life Sciences, B. Braun, and Dexcom, leaders from those companies who really have some important information to share with us, things that are happening within their spheres of influence that are critically important to our patients and to our collective cause, both as patient advocates and as stewards of the healthcare ecosystem. So again, my name is Randy Ruta. I'm the CEO of the National Health Council, and it's a real pleasure to introduce this group to you today. So let me just mention quickly who our three first panelists will be. We've got Kim Zimmerman, and she'll introduce a little bit about her organization, which is AdvaMed, but she serves as Senior Vice President and Head of Federal Government Affairs for AdvaMed, which is the Advanced Medical Technology Association. Really a critical organization providing leadership, a longtime partner and member of the National Health Council. Thank you so much, Kim, for being with us today. One individual who could not join us and asked that I mention that he's with us here in spirit is Kenny Mendez, someone who certainly knows all of our speakers today, who came through AdvaMed as a longtime contributor to that association. And Kenny currently serves as the CEO for AFA, as well as our board chair at the National Health Council. So Kenny, I know you'll be listening to the recording of this session and know that you're definitely here with us in spirit. Following Kim will be Andrew Fish, who's the president and CEO of the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And he also has a long history in the medical device and technology space. He's been a colleague for many years. I'm very pleased to serve on the board of MDIC, and I can't be more impressed with the great work that they're doing and with his leadership. And then lastly, I've asked Mark Leahy, who heads up the Medical Device Manufacturers Association, to talk to us about the work of the medical device and technology space from the manufacturer's perspective. And I think that'll be critically important as we hear how patients themselves are involved in the work that he and his members do. And that's really true across the board. So I'll stop there. That'll be our first panel. Please do put your questions in the chat, and I'll come back to you when we have a few minutes after our three speakers. And then we'll take a moment to transition to our next panel, at which point I will introduce those speakers from the three companies that I mentioned. But with that, Kim, could you kick things off for us?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you. And it's so nice to be joined by so many of my colleagues in this space too. So again, thank you. I really appreciate it. So for those of you not familiar with AdvaMed, I thought I'd just give a little bit of background. So AdvaMed is an international trade association. We advocate for patient access to safe, effective, and innovative medical technologies that save and improve lives. We have about 400 members. They range in size from, very small. They may have, one product that is going through the approval process at FDA to Fortune 500 companies. So, we really run the gamut in terms of and size. They also have a vast variety of products and technologies, ranging from needles to respirators to diagnostic tests to digital technologies. So we are very different in terms of size and scope of products and technologies, but we all really have the same overall mission, which is to improve and save the lives of our patients. So that is just kind of our overlying theme. I thought what would be helpful for me is maybe to touch on a couple of issue areas that we have worked with a number of your members on, and that I thought would probably be the most of interest and relevant to those on the call. So the issues that I thought that would be the most helpful, there are three. One is a recent rule called the Medicare Coverage of Innovative Technology, in the past and now called the Transitional Coverage for Emerging Technologies. One is the VALID Act, and then finally touching a little bit on supply chain issues too. So those are the three issues of focus for me today. So the first issue, which of course we love our acronyms in DC, as I mentioned, it was MCIT, is now TCIT, is a rule that was first put out in 2020, really at the end of the Trump administration. And when the Biden administration came in, they put a pause on the rule, as they did, with others that were still pending. They ended up repealing it, but just recently in June, they replaced it with a new rule. And this is something, that we've been very focused on. We've been working, with Mark at MDMA. We share a lot of common members and common interests, and have really been, working, on this rule. And we're very excited that it finally came out in June. It was not all that we wanted it to be, but we were excited to see it. And what this issue is in the 21st Century Cures law, there was a pathway given for emerging technologies. So technologies that were really innovative. They really, saved patient lives. There was nothing like it on the market. But there was no coverage attached to it. So it helped in the FDA approval process, just expediting the approval. And when I say expediting, it doesn't mean that they weren't safe technologies. It just meant that they were, given, a level of priority at FDA to get them through the approval process. But unfortunately, as we all know, if there's no coverage, it's very hard for patients to have access, to these technologies. So the original MCIT rule, would have allowed for these emerging technologies to be covered immediately, of course, with some ramifications and some parameters. But again, that was repealed, and then the TCIT rule or notice was released in June, and there were a number of changes made from what was originally in the MCIT rule. And, again, we were happy to see that this was released, but we're hoping to see some changes. It really is very limited in what it does. It only allows for really 5 technologies a year to go through this process. It doesn't have automatic coverage. And diagnostic testing was not included in this as it was previously. Also, you have to have a current Medicare benefit coverage category to be included. We were happy that there is a process laid out in it that provides more guidance and specificity in terms of the approval process. But again, it's very, very limited. So the comment period is currently open. We have submitted, are about to submit comments. We are working with the patient community. So I know MDMA is, I know MDIC is working on this too. And so we would love any help if there's anyone that has an interest in working on this. There's also been a lot of congressional interest in this issue. There's been legislation that has been introduced that isn't exactly either MSIT or TSET, but very much in line with the thinking of both. And there was recently a congressional hearing including these issues. So, we're hoping that the rule comes out in a way that we are very supportive of, but if not, there's also congressional interest and potential action on this. So we're very excited, about the congressional interest also. So that's the first issue. The second issue, as I mentioned, is the VALID Act. And the VALID Act had a lot of attention last year during the user fee process, a lot of interest both particularly in the Health Committee, but also in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and a lot of discussion about including it in the Omni at the end of the year. Unfortunately, it wasn't included, but there's still a lot of interest in working on it. And what this would do would be set up a regulatory pathway that is modern and consistent for both in vitro tests and lab developed tests. Right now, there's kind of two different systems for the approval process. And we think having consistency and reliability, is very important. About 70% of all healthcare decisions are made based on diagnostic testing. So, getting it right is incredibly important. So, again, we're hoping that Congress acts on this. The legislation has been reintroduced in the House. We've been working with Senator Burr on the legislation, and of course he retired. So we're working on a Senate companion. But FDA is also very involved in this, and they're very interested in pursuing a pathway for lab developed tests. They have a rule that is pending at OMB on lab developed tests. Of course, we don't know what's included in it other than we know that it's pending there. But they have publicly said that is something that if Congress doesn't act, they would be interested in acting on. And we appreciate all of the help that this community has given us, both in terms of going to the Hill and going to the administration and pursuing that. So that is the second issue. And then just because of time constraints, I'll quickly just go through the last issue, which is supply chain challenges. And I know that as we're finally coming out of the pandemic, we're starting to see the supply chain be more robust and kind of back to 2019 levels. But I just wanted to flag an issue that does concern us that could prevent future challenges, and that is the issue of how our products are sterilized. A number of our products, about half, are sterilized with a chemical called ethylene oxide. And it's something that, this administration has been very, very focused on, and, for very, very good reason. EPA has recently proposed two different rules that would affect the use of ETO. And, we are just concerned that if capacity is lowered for the sterilization, process, that it would affect the ability of our products to get to our patients. We are not the only industry that uses ethylene oxide. Others do too. The spice industry, for example, does. A lot of nail salons, things like that. It just kind of runs the gamut in terms of who uses ethylene oxide. And for us, there's no alternative. Other types of sterilization will damage the products, which then damage the ability to use them safely and effectively. And so EPA, like I said, is looking at comments right now on these two rules. And we've been working with the administration, working with the administrator on trying to find a common solution. And we will keep you posted. But if there's any interest from any of these participants, we'd love to work with you too, and appreciate the comments that many of you have submitted to EPA. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Randy.
Oh, thanks, Kim. And thank you so much for flagging those issues. And I know you and a number of the people that are on the call today are very participatory in our policy work, our action teams, as we try to keep ahead of some of these, really critical issues and bring that patient perspective forward. So thanks for kind of going through those with us today. And we'll see, based on questions that we may have from the group as we go forward. And then also we will finish with kind of a call to action for each of you. What is it that you really would like the patient community to do in terms of engaging on these issues that are so critically important to all of us? So Kim, thanks so much for that. And why don't I turn things over to Andy to share MDIC's perspective.
Well, that's great, Randy. Thank you. It's great to be here with you. I appreciate your leadership on our board, not only your personal contributions, but your ability to act as a liaison to this great community at the National Health Council. That's fantastic. And I'm really pleased to be here with all my medical device colleagues. As Randy said, I have a long background in medical devices. I first entered the healthcare world back in about 2003 as the head of federal government relations for the American Cancer Society. So I still appreciate all this time later that I came into healthcare from the patient advocacy perspective, and I've carried that with me ever since. I just came to MDIC a year ago. I was at AdvaMed for 12 years before that in various roles. And I want to just take a little bit of time this morning or this afternoon to just give you a quick framework of who MDIC is and what we're doing and how we're both aligned with and yet differentiated for some of the other organizations that are presenting today. So MDIC was formed just about 10 years ago, and we're formed as a public-private collaboration, a public-private entity comprised of members from both the private sector and the public sphere, and originally conceived as an initiative between FDA and regulated medical device manufacturers. And that was the kind of the original core of MDIC. Our membership now, how it has been and continues to be, wide open, right? So obviously our central mission focuses around advancing quality, safe, effective medical devices to patients faster. But we welcome everyone who's interested in healthcare or interested in the issues we're working on to come together as members around the MDIC table to work collaboratively on addressing, complex challenges. And I just want to emphasize that point that everyone around our table is in fact a member, a peer-to-peer member. So when FDA staff who participate in our work groups and sit at our, around our various issues are working as members with other organizations like medical device manufacturers, patient advocacy organizations, and others. And so everyone has kind of equal member status working together shoulder to shoulder. It's a little bit different than a relationship with, for example, FDA or CMS, as supplicants to or lobbyists to, right? That arm's length relationship. At MDIC, we are identifying issues that are of mutual interest across all these different stakeholders and working together to address them. And so fundamentally what we work on addressing are not the policy issues per se. We don't advocate for regulatory change or statutory change, although we're keenly aware of that broader context in which we're working. But we address the underlying kind of scientific and technical challenges, and it's kind of the science and the technical disciplines that underpin medical technology. And I'll talk more in a minute about kind of what our work encompasses. But I wanted to give you maybe two different frames of reference to think about how do we identify issues? What's the broader context in which we're advancing our work? And one of those contexts, of course, is just what's everything going on in medical technology and how is med tech shaping healthcare? And you're all familiar, of course, with the big trends. And so I'll only take a moment to just call them out briefly. One of them, of course, is the increasing ability of medical devices to collect data in new ways. In some cases, it's novel data, or it's data that we haven't been able to collect before in certain kinds of ways, right? So wearables, on body, in body, other kinds of devices that can collect information from patients in some cases are collecting data that we've never had before, or we're collecting, for example, data longitudinally over the course of a day, a week, a month that maybe previously we would only get once a year during a checkup, right? That fundamentally changes healthcare because it's bringing a whole new window into the status of different health conditions. And of course, then we have that next layer, which is automation and connected devices layered on top of that data collection and data analysis. So for example, in the diabetes area, which Bruce can speak to it a lot more eloquently, you've got all of these elements now married together where you've got devices that are actually collecting immediate real-time longitudinal data on patients and driving in an automated way interventions, therapeutic intervention of providing an insulin dose, right, to keep blood sugar in check. So this sort of integration of medical devices, both at the level of the patient and across various healthcare settings, is fundamentally changing healthcare. But these things at the same time also pose a lot of challenges for regulators, right? Because you've got fast-moving technology iteration, you've got all this new software layered in that regulators have to try to understand. You've got software iterating very quickly. Regulation is really not built around moving quickly. And now we've got layered in kind of the challenges of advanced software and AI, right, which is even more challenging. If AI is deployed to continuously improve itself out in the wild, how do regulators think about approving that kind of device that's powered by this kind of software? Or in some cases, software is itself a medical device, right? And the entire medical device that's been approved as being safe and effective really consists essentially solely of software. So we have all these challenges. And we think about, what does that universe look like? And we spend a lot of time collaboratively between industry, FDA, and other stakeholders just examining this landscape and thinking about, well, what are the mutual challenges? How do we get to the future in a more effective way? How do we get there faster? How do we move devices through this ecosystem more quickly so patients can benefit from them? And so I'll talk in a minute about, at least broadly, kind of what we look at to break down some of these complex challenges. The other way to think about the medical device ecosystem is on a more or less linear basis, right? Which is you're thinking of ideation early on, right? Someone's got an idea for a device, maybe it's novel or it's an improvement to an existing device. And then you've got this long chain of work and decision making that goes between that ideation and actually reaching the patient, right? So you've got manufacturing and design questions, you've got actual production. You start collecting your data around, is this device safe? Is it effective for patients? How do I prepare to go to FDA? You've got a stage gate there, right? Can't get to market without FDA saying you're good to go. But then you've got a whole series of decision making after that you've got to get through, right? So now you've got to get through a coding and coverage and reimbursement process that I think probably most of you understand is somewhat torturous. It can be really difficult, but that's more stage gates, right? And you have to be collecting and kind of arraying and analyzing your evidence as you prepare to go to the next decision makers on your way to the patient. And ultimately, of course, you're getting down to decisions by health systems and clinicians trying to decide, well, which device is better for my patient? How do I select the right one for this patient or this health condition and so forth? And then all the way into getting the patient voice, right? And let me just pause on that moment. What we're working on along with all of you is getting the patient voice integrated in this whole process from the very beginning, right? Not just at the end of like, oh, I've got this device and I've gone through all these other stages and now I'm bringing it to you, the patient. But can we really authentically get the patient voice involved all the way back to design and manufacturing, and then carry those patient interests all the way through the kind of through that life cycle? And so again, I'll talk more about that in a minute. But those are kind of at least two different frames of reference for thinking about how we identify the challenges going on here, right? The big kind of trends and challenges going on in medical device iteration and healthcare at large, and then that long process of getting all the way from the early ideation all the way to the patient. So our work really breaks down roughly into 4 major pillars of work. And we have 8 program areas with projects under each one, and I'm not going to belabor that. Love to follow up with folks after this call or take some questions around that. But you can essentially think of our work as falling into 4 areas. One is quality design and manufacturing. one is evidence generation, one is digital health, and one is patient engagement. So briefly, in quality design and manufacturing, we're working on programs to help manufacturers actually improve the quality of devices through better design, better manufacturing processes, which has downstream implications, right? It strengthens the applications that manufacturers put into FDA, but it also improves patient safety, right? So we have fewer recalls, higher quality devices. So that early stage of driving more quality processes and planning and design into the early manufacturing stages is really critical. In evidence generation, I just mentioned how there's like these stage gates all the way down through this life cycle. We are working on the underlying disciplines of how you generate better data, more insightful analysis to make a stronger application to FDA, bring stronger information to payers that's more compelling around why a product should be covered. So for example, real-world evidence, of course, we're looking at real-world evidence applications in the context of both FDA and in payer coverage decision-making. And we're developing and furthering kind of the science of real-world evidence analysis. And we have an arm of MDIC that's actually driving specific projects with manufacturers to bring more applications to FDA that incorporate or rely entirely on the collection and analysis of real-world evidence. In the digital health arena, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that's a complex and sort of burgeoning aspect of medical devices. And we're addressing a number of areas where the advances in digital health are challenging for both industry and regulators alike to kind of get their arms around. And so we're driving advances in that area. Finally, but not, last but not least on my order of topics is patient engagement. And we are working on both specific areas of where you can bring the patient voice more clearly into both the regulatory and payer decision-making. So we've been working for years with FDA on what we call a science of patient input, which is how does the regulator actually gather information about what patients want and need that's relevant for the regulator to help drive a decision, not rely necessarily entirely on it, but how do you include patient information and input in a scientific way that's rigorous enough to contribute to FDA's evaluation of safety and effectiveness and help drive those decisions. So we're working on that front more recently, but just as importantly, we're also working on how do you drive more patient preference information into payer decision-making, right? How should payers be thinking about patient preference information? How do you collect it? How do you collect it in a way that should be seen as scientifically rigorous and valid for taking into consideration and making coverage decisions? And then finally, we're working, as are so many other organizations, on building out more opportunities for patients to actually engage with the medical device industry, both through MDIC and directly with manufacturers. And that I'll maybe come back to that when we're sort of talking about wrap up and call outs. But all of our work together essentially is driven by subject matter expertise within MDIC. We convene work groups. We have hundreds of experts from across our member companies and sometimes recruited from elsewhere to come together to drive the work in these various projects. And ultimately, it results in kind of 5 or 6 major areas of impact. One is higher quality devices. We have expedited time to market and time to patient, enhanced patient safety and access, improved regulatory pathways, and better evidence for approval, coverage, and utilization decisions. And so I'll just come back to say, again, our work is not that of the traditional lobbyist in Washington. We are not advocating with policymakers to change the overarching regulatory and legislative frameworks. We're driving the underlying science that helps advance the development of medical technologies down through that whole life cycle and propel devices into patient care. So, Randy, that's my overview. Happy to take questions as we go along. Really appreciate the opportunity to give an overview of MDIC.
Well, thank you so much for that, Andy. And I mean, it's just so comprehensive in terms of what, the MDIC members, who include all the groups here and so many organizations well known to the patient community. I really appreciate, the patient centricity that you bring to MDIC and its work. The members truly embrace that. And I believe the forum is going to have programs specifically dedicated to those topics coming up in September. I'm right?
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for mentioning that. And I should call out as well health equity, because that is a topic in which we are exploring extensively, as are obviously so many other organizations. Our annual public forum that Randy just mentioned is in DC. It's September 19th and 20th. Right. And we have a number of sessions at that conference focused specifically on health equity, including speakers from CMS and payers and medical technology manufacturers and so forth, as well as a wide range of kind of other topics that I'm sure of interest to this group. So please do check that out.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. Now let's turn to you, Mark. I mean, you're a longtime advocate in the medical device and technology space, a real contributor, certainly to our work at the National Health Council. You and your team always helping us look at policies, things that are being considered by the administration, by Congress, by other parts of the health ecosystem to really understand, well, what does that mean for this highly innovative, many ways entrepreneurial community that serves patients through devices and technology? Maybe you can tell us a little bit from your perspective as president, CEO of the Medical Device Manufacturers Association, just what issues you're working on right now, what you'd want to call attention to for this patient community.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you and all of your great patient members and our colleagues at AdvaMed, MDIC, and 3 joint members will be speaking a little bit later. As Kim said, the patient's at the core of all of our collective efforts here. And I think, if any issue you take forward without that as the kind of focus of the lens, you're not going to be successful. Having the good fortune of representing about 300, primarily small and mid-sized med tech companies. We do work with some of the larger companies as well, but our DNA are really small to mid-sized venture-backed, drive a lot of the innovation in the space. And typically they're developing novel disruptive technologies that don't have a well-worn regulatory path, that don't have a well-worn reimbursement path. And so our job is to try to how we smooth that out, ultimately ensuring patients have timely access to these safe and effective products. And again, when you're dealing with many of these issues, if you have the regulated versus the regulator, I always joke that those are 2 unsympathetic faces. So how do we bring this? The so what here is the patient. I think there's no greater demonstration of that impact. Just a couple of recent examples. Back in 2009, 10, 11, the FDA, things really came to a grinding halt with new technologies coming to the market. And at the time, there were folks at FDA said, well, we want to protect patients. We want to have more testing and trying to zero out 100% of the risk. And unfortunately, for most technologies, it's the benefits outweigh the risks, and there may be some modest or minor risk that's there, but ultimately the benefits outweigh the risks. And up until a long part of that discussion and through the patient voice and congressional hearings, FDA was only looking at one side of the coin, saying, well, if we ask more questions, we can protect patients. What through the course of those discussions, though, and the patient voice being critical and the physician voice highlighting technologies like our friends at Edwards or others were developed in the US, and the US was the 40th or 50th country in which they were getting authorized to come to market. And there it was finally because of that patient voice, it was the opportunity cost. How do you calculate that, the impact on delay to patient access on the other side of the coin to trying to de-risk? And that really, I give Dr. Shuren and his team at CDRH credit, I think created a catalyst to have the US and CDRH have the vision and the mission for the US to be the first country in the world to bring these novel technologies to the market. And I think, again, you and your team have been so instrumental in these discussions, that patient voice. And I think from my perspective, it's so important to distinguish between the patient voice and the consumer voice. I think the consumer voice in DC, from my perspective, tends to be paternalistic, they're arm's length, and they kind of an ivory tower approach, versus the patient groups who they themselves, a family member, a loved one, are on the front lines and are willing to want to have more say in how decisions are made. And again, I think through our collective efforts here with industry, working with patient groups, the benefit risk framework and how that's evolved over the last decade has been really important, because prior to that, it was kind of an FDA reviewer setting, all right, here's the bar about everything, risk, and not having a range depending upon certain characteristics of a patient and what their objectives were in the physician, that you needed some flexibility here to assess the benefit and the risks, and again, not have that kind of paternalistic approach. And so I think as we look forward, that kind of setting the stage of kind of, I think, how important and impactful the patient voice has been. Just 3 quick issues I think they've been covered by Kim, but maybe just put a finer point on some on this, this transitional coverage for emerging technologies, TSET. This is effectively, and there was just a great study that was published in JAMA this past week from Dr. Josh Mackauer, who's a physician inventor. And they found that looking at novel technologies from 2016 to 2019, on average, it took 5.7 years from market authorization to adequate coverage. And so again, these are products that FDA deem as safe and effective. And all industry is trying to do here is saying, all right, FDA said it's safe and effective, and they're novel. Many are unmet clinical needs, have the impact to help patients there. And there should be a transitional coverage period over a 4-year window where the company continues to collect additional data here to demonstrate, further evidentiary body and move forward. And again, they're safe and effective, and we don't think it's appropriate that a Medicare beneficiary is waiting 5.7 years on average. FDA makes that determination. So when it comes to the specific proposal of what CMS put forward in TSET, I think it made some modest improvements around how coverage with evidence development works and provides more transparency, which is a net positive. However, I think there's a number of products that aren't addressed in this framework. As Kim said, if we're talking about 5 technologies a year, that's not, I think, sufficient to ensure that patients have timely access to these novel technologies. So there's work that we can be doing here, that we are doing, continue to do, both with CMS, and as Kim said, there's bipartisan legislation up on the Hill, about 55 co-sponsors, I think, or low 50s, more Democrats than Republicans looking to codify some of these reforms. So we appreciate the support thus far, and we'll continue to work forward in that direction. The other issue of the 3, and Kim alluded to this in the supply chain context, and this is, again, around EPA proposals around ethylene oxide sterilization. And this is not something we have to take industry's word for. The FDA is on record and highlighting how concerned they are if EPA moves forward with their proposals, the impact that would have on patient access. As Kim said, 20 billion products a year are sterilized through ETO. It's the only validated modality, more than half of all medical devices. And our companies have looked at alternatives, but because of the way they're manufactured, the materials they're manufactured, none exist. That doesn't mean we aren't looking for additional solutions. I think there's been a lot of great progress made with some of the sterilizers on using lower amounts of ETO to have the same sterility effect. So no one's suggesting the status quo is satisfactory, but what EPA has proposed is so far outside the world of reasonable or science driven. And again, FDA's raised concerns. The hospitals are out there saying if EPA moves forward, and let's back up here. We're talking about a very small, and again, the science is being debated right now on a marginal increase in potential cancer if you have somebody who has 70 years of direct exposure, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, versus if EPA finalizes their proposals, there will be an absolute impact, and the hospital executives have said this and others, of the surgical kits to deliver babies, and that impact will be felt in weeks or months. So, these are the things that your group and others and physicians and a number of folks weighing in and making sure that EPA is looking at the totality of a situation and again, weighing the benefits and the risks associated with different decisions. And we continue to work to ensure hopefully the EPA doesn't finalize these proposals without material changes that, again, improves the way medical products are sterilized, but don't create the unintended consequence of a massive shortage of device manufacturing. And the other piece of this is, I think some in the EPA they won't admit this publicly, but they're simply saying, well, what's the problem if we just, restrict things here in the US and people have to go offshore for sterilization? Well, I can tell you, and everyone knows, the Department of Commerce has worked vigorously over the last 3 years through COVID, and our industry has too, to reshore more, have more domestic manufacturing of critical supplies. But I can tell you there's not a single company who can afford to manufacture something here, ship it offshore to get sterilized, then ship it back here to sell. So these are just the practical issues that we're bringing to the forefront, and hopefully we'll be able to have success working with a variety of stakeholders, including the patients. The final topic, I think, and where I started on the FDA, because this is certainly an area where there's been dramatic improvements, and incorporating the patient perspective has been something that FDA has built upon. But I think we just made a massive investment of over $2 billion in the last user fee program, and it more than doubled the investment in patient engagement, and ways to, again, have that patient voice be incorporated into the decision making. And that is something that FDA is building upon, but was touched on earlier too. Private payers, there was a study done by James Chambers of Tufts a few years back, and it looked at how private payers make coverage decisions. And as you can imagine, not very transparent, not much publicly available. And I don't think at that point, any of the private payers had a formal mechanism to incorporate patient preference into the decision-making. So that's why I think the work that Andy and his team are doing at MDIC to drive more consistency, transparency, so that these decisions, we're not saying every medical technology should have coverage on day one and no data collected, but we have to have a more holistic approach to make sure they're safe and effective, meet the needs of the patient, and have kind of a mechanism that will allow for access, additional data to be generated, and kind of to that, expand out more broadly to impact, have the most patients as possible. So, again, I am very bullish on the impact and the technologies that our collective members are developing, and you hear from some of those shortly. They're treating chronic disease, acute issues facing the patient population. They're doing so in less acute settings. And as we all know, labor is probably the single biggest cost driver in healthcare. And so for us to be able to collectively bring solutions that meet the patients and the setting that's most comfortable for them, most impactful from an outcome standpoint, and takes costs out, I mean, that's the trifecta. But unfortunately, some of the regulatory and reimbursement mechanisms in place lag behind the technology. So again, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today, and our colleagues, both from the associations and industry and all the patient community voices here, because there's a lot of opportunity ahead, and we just need to continue to work together to make sure that we smooth those edges out so that the patients have access to these great innovations and improve care as quickly as possible.
Well, that's great, Mark. Thank you so much. That was really comprehensive. And we do have a few minutes. I know I've gotten some questions that have come in. One, each of you mentioned that you really do value patient engagement, having the patient voice, participate in these decisions. Maybe you could just give an example of just how that occurs. You mentioned agencies that they have processes themselves, the FDA and others. Congress certainly will hold hearings. They can kind of set the stage for ways in which the patient community, if we're aware and educated, can jump in. But maybe you could just touch briefly on what you've seen as effective avenues for engaging patients and the kinds of things that, in some cases, pretty technical things that you just mentioned today. Maybe we'll start with you, Kim, and then turn to Andy and Mark again.
Sure. Thanks. Well, one thing that AdvaMed has is we have a quarterly stakeholder meeting. So we bring interested stakeholders together to talk about our issues, hear about your issues, find out ways that we can collaborate and work together. And then once we learn of those mutual interests, we will utilize you, and you may wish you had not come to these meetings. No, I'm just kidding. But whenever we're doing Hill meetings or administration meetings, your voice is just so important. So we try to include patient groups as much as possible, and we know that it's such an added benefit to lawmakers, when they're hearing from you too. And, we know oftentimes, you are wearing many hats. So we try to make it as easy as possible by setting up the meetings and, and including you. So we did that, quite a lot during the user fee negotiations. We're doing it right now. Mark and my association, are working, with the patient community on the TSET rule. So we really value what you bring to the table. So thank you.
Well, that's just great. As I mentioned earlier, Kenny Mendez, who serves as our board chair, he's the CEO for Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, longtime, a colleague of everyone on the call, certainly a colleague at AdvaMed. That's one of the things that he really felt most proud of is the sincere desire to engage patients and to share information and help the patient community know what's at stake. And I think each of you really touched on that. Andy, you mentioned working groups, ways in which are literally established pathways for groups like those on the call today might collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I think, I see this as like two levels of patient engagement, right? And one is directly with companies. And I think you're going to hear from multiple, company speakers, in a few minutes about patient engagement at that level, which of course is critical. And I think, there's a lot of companies out there that want that level of engagement that don't yet have it, right? They either haven't yet structured into their companies, or they need assistance from folks like all of you on the call today in terms of like helping to identify the relevant patient populations. And they really want to authentically engage with patients over time, right? Not just a transactional interaction, but really kind of, those relationships. I would say the same is true for us, but we're probably, in terms of our work groups, we're looking more to the professionals like yourselves, right, who are representing various groups of patients. Although we also have what I would consider sort of, patient advocates who are, kind of schooled in and trained, right, to be representative of patient interests. But and we can obviously follow up after this call in any detail you'd like. We do have multiple work groups working in areas that I know are of interest to the patient community, which provide that opportunity to not only provide input from a patient-oriented perspective, but also to learn from the work that we're doing, right? And sit around the table, whether it's real or virtual, depending on the meeting, with FDA colleagues, with CMS colleagues, and obviously from a wide range of industry and other stakeholders. And that there is an opportunity there to have your patient advocacy voice heard and shape the work that we're doing. And obviously we have some programs that are very focused specifically on patient input, and that's, one obvious place, but a wide array of other work areas of work that likely are of interest as well.
Excellent. Well, we will take that away as you mentioned, kind of having this call serve as a bridge and a starting point for a greater level of interaction and collaboration across all of our interests. So that would be good. Mark, you mentioned specifically, the importance of having patients engage. You also mentioned something else, and I since got a little chat that came through about cost and really being cognizant of what costs are within the system and ultimately for patients to bear and accessing, their treatments, which could include everything from diagnostics to the technologies, the devices and technologies themselves, but maybe opportunities for engagement. And then just a quick comment on cost and how patients can understand how your member organizations are really sensitive to that in terms of their care.
Sure. Yeah, I think for the engagement part, I mean, we recognize, as Kim said, that there are a number of groups here, and the plates are already full with a number of issues. So the first screen is really taking a look at what are the ones that are kind of nice to have, not need to have, and where, again, the impact on the patient is acute enough where we feel, okay, this is something where we need to partner. And again, Randy, you all do such a great job of having meetings that convene regularly for our industry, and we have team members who participate. And so we tend to, raise these issues first with you and your team. And if there's that kind of joint interest, then how do we take something, and again, maybe that's our companies are maybe very granular and technical, and try to not simplify in a bad way, but focus the impact on patient access in a concrete and material way, and share those thoughts. And again, not just, talking points, but here's the source material, here's the so why. So don't take our word for it, but here are our concerns, and pressure test them. And in most instances, I think there's complete alignment there. In other instances, well, it's, we are okay with going here. And so there's maybe a third way. So that really is the way we have found the collaboration work, is first screen out the stuff that doesn't really rise to the level where, given limited resources, time, bandwidth, maybe they could be addressed otherwise. But on that core group that are material to the collective folks, collaborate, simplify, help tailor message, and refine and get feedback, so that ultimately the solution is one that we can all agree on. And on the cost perspective, I think this is one where, again, when you look at and I want to be sensitive here to our brethren in the pharmaceutical space, but when you look at most medical technology here, you have maybe one or two players in the first year or two, but then you have multiple participants that drive competition and usually enhance capabilities, features, and candidly, many of these devices are used to manage chronic disease. Bruce is going to talk a little bit more. These are things that are huge spends to the healthcare system if left unmanaged. And when you have, sometimes there's issues with compliance on a drug regime or others, that devices can choose to be the benefit. And again, just a couple quick other ways to highlight it. When drug-eluting stents came onto the market, they were $3,500 a pop. Now they're about $1,200 a pop. You look at TAVR, you know, you went from having a heart cracked open chest, you're in the hospital for 3 weeks, now you're out in a few days. So these are all things that improve the patient outcome, reduce cost to the overall system. And I think our industry has a great track record of really developing and delivering on high value therapies that meets the needs of the patients. And again, exciting for what the future holds as well.
Well, that's great for commenting on both the patient engagement component as well as just how sensitive I think all three of you are in your respective organizations, but then also, you know, really everybody in this sector is to the cost and to the cost benefit that certainly patients can realize, which is just life-changing, life-saving in many instances. So thank you for commenting on that. Well, why don't we jump ahead to our company representatives who you've kind of set the stage very nicely for. I'll introduce first Raj Traylor, who's at Edwards Life Sciences, very knowledgeable in this space. And of course, Edwards has been a long time member and contributor to the National Health Council's priorities and really our ability to advocate on behalf of patients around devices and just health generally. So Raj, thank you so much for joining us. Mike Golubiowski is with us from B. Braun, and I've just been very impressed with the work of their organization, the passion that I think he'll speak to, in particular in the areas around equity and the ability to provide medical devices and treatments that are successful for people from many backgrounds. And so, Mike, I'm excited to hear from whatever you're going to share with us here today. And Bruce with Dexcom. So Bruce serves in a senior role there, longtime member of this sector, and Dexcom, one of the newer members to the National Health Council. So we're delighted to have you here with us today. And Bruce, you've heard Mark and others kind of call out some of the work that you're doing at Dexcom, which is so absolutely related to the headlines of how it is patients are challenged in their health and now have opportunities to address and maintain their health in different ways. So Raj, why don't I turn to you first and tell us a little bit about, you know, the great work that's occurring at Edwards Life Science and kind of your perspective that's going to be important for our patient organizations to hear.
Perfect. Thanks you, Randy. I appreciate it, the National Health Council for inviting Edwards to participate in this great discussion. Again, my name is Raj Traylor. I'm the Global Director for Patient Engagement for Edwards Life Sciences. I joined Edwards about a year ago. So really happy to be in this space. Edwards is the global leader in innovation around structural heart disease and critical care monitoring. How do we maintain our patient focus? One thing that really attracted me to Edwards when I joined last year is I've been in the pharmaceutical space for quite some time. And all the companies I've been with all say that they're patient focused. Edwards does things a little bit differently in terms of showing that. One of the things that we do is we have an event called the patient experience that is part of actually strategy. It's not just an event, but it's something that we duplicate around the world. First of all, we bring and connect our employees to the patients themselves that they're actually working on devices to treat. So we invite about 50 patients to our headquarters here in Irvine, California, with their caregivers. They get a chance to take tours and look and visit with all the manufacturers. We also have patient listening sessions. We actually have other functions with legal, HR, marketing, people that don't typically touch the patients. They get the opportunity to hear directly from patients and their caregivers in terms of the impact that these devices are having on their lives. But even more importantly, in terms of how can we improve? How can we be even more patient focused? So this is something that's been part of Edwards' strategy for the last few years. In terms of an advocacy perspective, we actually started inviting advocacy organizations that we partner with to participate in these events. So they get a chance, along with the patients, as well as their caregivers, to take these tours and learn from all the different stories in terms of what impact that our devices are having on their lives. So that's one way that Edwards is really uniquely in terms of maintaining our patient focus. So in terms of how can we engage with patient advocacy groups? One way is around things that patient advocacy groups do really, really well in terms of education and awareness around innovation, around disease, unmet needs in disease states. So we're going to be, right now, we're obviously in the TAVR space. We've been there for a while. We have a strong position in that. We're also going to be looking at other valvular disease, particularly around tricuspid and mitral. We know that these are two valve disorders that there's not a lot of options for patients right now. Very deadly, very serious conditions where we're going to need a lot of help from organizations to be able to provide that trusted education. I mean, us as an industry only can go so far in terms of putting out messages around the importance of some of these diseases, but we know that the trusted advocacy groups here on this call in the communities can do a much better job in terms of explaining the importance of understanding these valuable diseases and how it can impact them. Another piece of that, and I believe some of my colleagues will talk about later, is around health equity. Edwards, we see data, particularly in the TAVR community, where it's really unacceptable that for patients that are eligible for TAVR in the African American community, only less than 4% of them are actually accessing TAVR, which is compared to 90% of their white counterparts. This is really kind of an unacceptable situation that we have in the United States. We do have partners that we've been working with to address this, particularly around the Association of Black Cardiologists, doing some really exceptional work trying to help close that gap. But even within our own company, we have teams that people have questions I'm more than happy to ask. But internally, in terms of us really making significant investments and efforts to really close that gap in the TAVR space. The other part I'll talk about briefly is around policy. So Kim talked a little bit around TSET, so I'm not going to get into TSET, but that is definitely an important issue in terms of maintaining, because again, access is one thing, but there's not coverage and reimbursement. Access is not really going to be very helpful. Medical device technology and pharmaceuticals are very different, as someone mentioned before. Simply stated, once a drug is developed and approved, they're in their final form. Conversely, for medical technology like our transcatheter heart valves, we're constantly improving and iterating that technology. So clinicians learn and improve their skills with the medical technology over time. So reimbursement and approval is very key for us to make sure that we have the ability to continue to innovate over the life cycle of these new devices. So again, an opportunity for organizations like on this call to be really informed and be able to understand the distinction between a pharmaceutical engagement around policy and coverage and what it looks like for a medical device company. The last thing I'll do is in terms of challenges that I found in terms of, I think someone mentioned, I think Andy mentioned before, in terms of the partnership between medical device companies and patient advocacy groups. Most manufacturers of medical device aren't fortunate enough to have someone like myself and my team that is purely dedicated to patient engagement. I have a team that we focus, my role is around maintaining the relationship with patient advocacy groups. I have folks on my team like Andy mentioned from MDIC that is solely focused on working on patient preference information and patient preference studies so that we have the ability to go to the FDA and other regulators to say we have data showing the patient preference for X, Y, and Z, which is relatively unique. So partnering with patient organizations from a smaller to mid-sized manufacturer is a challenge because a lot of these organizations don't have some of the resources, or the ask from the advocacy group may be more on a transactional basis. We found that there's really more value in having those long-term partnerships. We have one with the American Heart Association called Target AS, which is a multi-year program in terms of bringing awareness around the severity of aortic stenosis. So these are the type of partnership that I see value, but I think the medical device manufacturers are a little behind the pharmaceutical space, but I think there's opportunity for real true partnerships. And that's what I'm excited about when I joined Edwards, to really bring that experience from the pharmaceutical landscape, but to kind of translate that into how it can really impact the medical device manufacturers. So with that, Andy, I'll stop and hand over to you.
All right. Well, Raj, thank you so much. And I really appreciate just the sincere focus that Edwards brings to the patient community, the diverse patient community, also helping to support patients in their interactions with their clinicians and how they can share in that decision making. I've had the opportunity to visit your campus and be part of really just engaging the whole community that's there, and it could not be more welcoming or more, as you suggested, more synergistic around helping patients, their caregivers understand how the work that's being done there really is so relevant to their lives. So really appreciate that. Let me turn now to Mike. So Mike's at B. Braun, Corporate Vice President, Healthcare Strategy and Innovation, a big role. Talk to us a little bit about what you're excited about that's been happening at B. Braun, which really got the National Health Council very excited to have you come into membership a few years ago.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks for having me, and appreciate the time. Yeah, I run our cross-functional incubator team. We go after complex problems, and one problem I'm going to talk about today is really the unacceptable yet accepted problem when it comes to peripheral IVs. So some of you guys might be scared to see this. The mere fact that over 70% of hospitalized patients require a peripheral IV catheter for IV therapy. And when you really think about it, whether it's yourself, friends, families, loved ones, like my mom, Mama G, she's been admitted several times. And really look at the experience when it comes to the number of sticks and the overall pain threshold and everything else with IV therapy, and more importantly, the peripheral catheter. They're really not good. And the mere fact is up to 69% of peripheral catheters actually fail before the completion of therapy. And more importantly, no patients, of course, ask to be stuck more than once. So the other part is that actually patients aren't even aware that the standard should be one catheter for your entire length of stay or course of therapy. Now, when we dug into this, we started to realize, okay, how are we going to solve for this? What are the core root problems to solve? And more importantly, B. Braun in itself can't just fix this problem with a better catheter. So how do we work with other organizations to raise the bar in peripheral IV catheters? And what do we need to fix and address? And today I'll just touch upon 3 key areas that we found as we started digging deeper and what's really causing this. So the first area is really around training. Surprisingly, when we were digging into this, we didn't realize that only 57% of nurses that when they graduate from nursing school actually taught how to start an IV. And that's a bit scary, especially when they enter the workforce. It's not up to the institution, and now the institutions are cutting back on budgets, training, etc. And it's really the standard has been see one, do one, and then teach one. And therefore, the experience levels really vary drastically, right? More importantly, the last 3 years, when you look at nursing turnover, it's been really bad. And a lot of our skilled nurses are retiring and leaving the industry. And therefore, how do you know our nurses are competent to start an IV? There are no core competency standards when it comes to starting IVs. And that's where we say, okay, we need to work together to solve for this. The good news is that on the training side of it, we did work with AVA, the Association of Vascular Access, where we now offer for free education, simulation, bedside support training for any nursing school out there, any clinician school out there, and then for institutions that require that or would want that, they could go ahead and contact AVA or B. Braun, and we're happy to offer that for free as well. So that's kind of the first hole we're trying to fill as far as a leak in the ship to solve this problem. Now, the second area is really around technology. Now we're saying, okay, we're not saying to apply technology just for the sake of technology, but what's practical again? And here we want to say, okay, first of all, before we start sticking people, one, we want to avoid the hands and the elbows. A lot of people go to the AC. It's easy to stick, easy to get access to. But then in the end, if you're admitted to the hospital, how are you going to eat? How are you going to move around? We know that catheter is not going to last. And how are you going to avoid the AC? And so that's where we say, you got to go for the top of the forearm. And more importantly, you need to identify your proper vein. You need to try to avoid the valves and bifurcations as well to make sure it lasts throughout the course of stay. And the best way to do that, we believe, is actually utilizing of near-infrared technology. There's a lot of near-infrared technologies out there, very cheap, passive, easy to use. And so we say before you start sticking people, we believe in zero blind sticks. Use near-infrared technology to identify your proper line of sight for the proper vein before you start sticking people. The second part of that we realized when we're actually doing some of the research in the study, we're working with MassGen, and MassGen actually has data to illustrate actually blacks get stuck more than whites. Now, there are reasons for that. Skin color does have an impact on identification of veins, body mass indexes, etc. Near-infrared, we believe, takes away all of that. And therefore, any patient, they should have near-infrared technology before they start sticking their patients as well. So that's the second area that we've been focusing on. And then the third area, when it comes to healthcare today, right? We measure and manage all the costs associated with central line CLABSI infections. We know the economic cost around 670,000 per healthcare system for an average bed of 250. We have all this data, KPIs, performance metrics for CLABSI on central lines. However, what do we have when it comes to peripheral IVs? The interesting part is peripheral IVs is 10 times larger than central lines. We're actually poking today alone. We'll have 1 million people getting stuck with a catheter, peripheral catheter today. Yet we have no data. We have no benchmarks as far as dwell times, first stick attempt rates, all these things. What we should be tracking and managing on the peripheral side, and we don't. The interesting part is the economic cost. When you look at BSIs for peripheral IVs that they just came out, it's actually 3 times the cost of central line CLABSI affections. It's coming in at 1.9 million per healthcare system. So you go, wow, this is a huge economic cost. The volumes, the number of attempts as far as sticks on peripheral lines is 10 times larger. But here we have no performance reviews, no KPIs. We have no data to track and measure and record that. And that's what we're asking for, the universal standards and having these metrics being required across the healthcare institutions too. So those are the three areas. We are working with all these different organizations to help solve this. In late June, we launched the Vascular Access Equity Patient Survey to study skin tone, body size, mass, other factors impacting peripheral IV experiences. And now we just launched the clinician survey as well. For those clinicians on the calls, you can actually go to the AVA website, complete your survey and your feedback. All that's going to be used to study and really work for the solutions to solve these things. The other thing we're working on with Mass Gen is actually how we're going to use the near-infrared to really solve and actually reduce the health inequity when it comes to blacks getting stuck more than whites as well. And so for us, it's how do we raise the bar together in the standards when it comes to peripheral IV therapy? Nobody's been focused there. Everybody's been focused on central lines. We talked about the economic costs, the utilization of proper near-infrared technology, and we believe we have a pretty good standing now in the training. Now we want to force those competency standards when it comes to clinicians entering the workplaces, so that they're actually not sticking any of us without really understanding where they start at. So how do we work to solve what I call one of the largest accepted but unacceptable problems? And also, how do we educate patients on what their experiences should be like, knowing that it should be one stick for your whole entire course of therapy and stay in the healthcare system. So that's kind of what we're doing. It's just starting, and we're starting to get moving with other organizations and looking to talk and get additional involved, what we believe is an important metric around peripheral IV catheters. So thank you, Randy.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think, you know, what you're sharing, I literally could feel the pain of what you were sharing as you kept talking about sticks and second and third attempts. And I know some of the infections that can come from that. You know, one of the things that all of us on this call, regardless of whether in the device space, the patient space, the pharma space, is the issue of hesitancy. And how can we, and I do want to come to Bruce, and Bruce will have some thoughts on this as well, probably all of our speakers. But, you know, when you're talking about starting lines, when you're talking about getting a vaccination, when you're talking about, you know, any kind of procedure that's going to involve a poke, you're going to want to have confidence as a patient that that's going to be hopefully as painless as possible, as successful as possible. It's not going to have consequences. So it seems like a lot of what you were sharing and where you'd like to see the whole system go with regard to standards, with regard to workforce training, use of technologies that could help make, you know, where it is someone goes to start a line more effective. That all plays into this experience of just the visit to the doctor in the stepping forward for a procedure, if that's truly what's necessary. How do you look at that hesitancy piece? It seems like that's a driver in a lot of what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I would say starting an IV requires a lot of confidence, right? So if you're not giving them the tools to do so, you're really setting them up for failure. And that's the one part I want to say is I'm not bashing nurses. I think nurses demand and deserve to be supported now more than ever. They've gone through a lot the last 3 years. And that's where organizations like BBRON and others need to step up and help fill the role, because they deserve that support. No one should go out there and just start an IV after they hear how it's done. And so that's what we're working to solve together.
Well, that's just great. And, we'll come back as we talk about how to engage the patient community even more in being side-by-side advocates to what it is you were sharing. Well, let's go to Bruce. So Bruce Taylor, Senior Director, Government Affairs at Dexcom, as I mentioned. Dexcom, one of our newest members at the National Health Council. Thrilled to have you in membership, and I'm excited that you have the opportunity to speak to our broad membership today. So Bruce, tell us really what's top of mind at Dexcom.
Well, Randy, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts. It was interesting in the first panel when Kim, Andy, and Mark, who I've worked with Andy and Mark and AdvaMed and all their organizations for a number of years. As they were providing their comments, I felt like the poster child for what each of them was prescribing and defining as what challenges are for innovative technologies. At Dexcom, we make continuous glucose monitoring for patients with diabetes. We have FDA labeling. It's for the management of diabetes for patients 2 years and older. It took 10 years to clear the hurdle to get a coverage policy with FDA. It's taken 5 years because we had to reestablish a new therapeutic category state by state in Medicaid. So you have this innovative technology, which there are two major breakthroughs for patients with diabetes: the invention of insulin 100 years ago and the advent of continuous glucose monitoring. Diabetes is a self-managed condition. You see the physician less than 1% of the time during the course of a year, and you're alone having to be a junior endocrinologist managing your condition. So having information and insight through technology is a significant breakthrough. Through the clinical trials that have been done on continuous glucose monitoring, we reduce hospitalizations by 50%. It's not the cost of the insulin, it's not the cost of the devices. What's crippling Medicare is that over 50% are hospitalizations and products for the comorbid conditions for uncontrolled diabetes. Dialysis is well over $100,000 a year, and it's over 40% of it's caused by uncontrolled diabetes. Over 52% of the Medicare budget is spent by Medicare beneficiaries with a diabetes diagnosis. From a fiduciary responsibility, somebody needs to wake up and say, I think we may be able to intervene, and we can. I'm blessed to have a corporate culture within Dexcom that we strongly believe if you take care of the patient first, the business will take care of itself. But in order to do what we've been able to do, we've had 5 changes in the local coverage determination with the DME MAC medical directors for Medicare policy. Then that cascades to Medicaid and cascades to commercial plans. But it's based upon having a very nimble coalition that involves the diabetes community, the clinicians, the professional societies, patient advocacy groups, patients themselves, the diabetes technology industry, all working in unison with 3 basic fundamental processes: facts, figures, and faces. You have to have evidence-based advocacy. The government affairs part of my job is basically I make sure I report when I communicate with members of Congress. The mechanism to move policy is advocacy. So that the diabetes community comes with a singular voice to say, here's my problem, here's how it's negatively impacting me, and here's what I'm asking you to do about it. And by having that voice in unison and understanding at the key what the patient is going through, I've been sort of blessed and cursed. I started my career in healthcare in 1977. It was the same year I got diagnosed with diabetes. So I understand the challenges as a patient. And I can speak rather eloquently about it. However, I have a corporate logo on my business card. So they listen to me, but then they say, well, you have a vested interest in this. Yes, but one day I'm going to be going into Medicare and I want to make sure I'm covered. So I'm a little selfish in that little perspective. But again, it's that patient perspective. Members of Congress and policymakers need to hear the voices of their constituents. When they understand a member of Congress has about 600,000 constituents, guess what? Probably half or more of them are either directly or indirectly impacted by diabetes. So if he or she wants to be a champion, this is something that people will listen to and it'll resonate with them. But I think it's working across the community, across the major organizations, and coordinating the messages that creates a chorus. Advocating, I'll give you to finish my comments, a single success story. Had a mother that attended Children with Diabetes, the Friends for Life conference in Orlando in early July. She worked for Arby's. She got promoted, and now her income, she lost Medicaid coverage for her daughter with type 1 diabetes. And all of a sudden, the cost of her diabetes technology became unaffordable. Through the advocacy programming at that event, she learned how to have a discussion with her HR manager. Before July was over, she convinced the HR manager to add continuous glucose monitoring to their pharmacy formulary with a copay that was affordable. That is one voice that impacted the lives of 80,000 employees for Arby's.
Wow.
So when you have facts, figures, and faces, you can move and change policy for the 30+ million patients with a diabetes diagnosis.
Bruce, that's really powerful. And I think for any of us that have been fortunate to work in an advocacy environment, we, I think, get up every morning and do have confidence that we can make a difference in the way that you described. I mean, you just can't allow yourself to be cynical. You can't allow yourself to be on the sidelines. With the right story, with the right experience, with enough conversation, you can actually drive change. Anything else you'd want to add to the patient community here? And I'm thinking now we've got time for you to really just share, you, Raj, Mike, I'll turn to our first panel, kind of if there's one call to action, and it's not just to the patient groups that are on the call, and we've kept basically a record-setting number of people who are participating today. But I'll put the National Health Council in there as ready to take an assignment as well. Is there as a single call to action and a way in which you talked about the benefit of engaging and having that information and taking forward together? Can you point us toward an opportunity, a way in which we can start to exercise or act on that recommendation?
I think the one piece, if you look at health equity within the diabetes space, and you look at the numbers, it is unacceptable in this country. If you look at COVID, you know who died? Minority patients with diabetes with COVID.
Yeah.
You look at that and you're saying, how could that be? Because they didn't have access to basic care for their diabetes or access to technology. When you know those figures and you say, that's interesting. By not
I think you froze on us, Bruce. Hold that thought. Mike, Raj, do you want to jump in while the technology brings Bruce back to life, please?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll echo in terms of what Bruce was saying in terms of the issue around health equity, and particularly in heart disease, we support is monumental. I think that the patient advocates on this call realize and are experts in this space. They know exactly all the levers to pull to really make this an important issue. So that would be my one call to action, is that where you have the opportunity to engage with the legislators, with regulators, and you can bring examples, kind of like Bruce did with the diabetes patient. There's a ton of examples like that in heart valve disease, where you have patients that could have been treated that didn't. So I think those are the type of opportunities where the organization on this call can really help.
That's great. That's just great. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, Randy, I would advocate for all the patient advocate groups here. Demand for a better experience around your peripheral IVs, demand for metrics, whether it's in HCAP scores or you name it, but there's got to be performance indicators. We need to educate our patients what good looks like and keep everyone accountable to what that is. And that would be a huge supporting effort in this area.
Terrific. That's terrific. And now let me turn to you, Mark and Kim and Andy. Any last call? Oh, and welcome back, Bruce. We lost you mid-sentence, but it was very powerful. So I'll give you an opportunity to finish that. But let me turn to Mark and Kim and Andy to see if they have that specific call to action, that assignment that I personally can take away in continuing to bridge this conversation and help translate it into action that is meaningful to patients and builds on the good work of your organization. So Kim, maybe you've got a thought.
Sure. Well, of the three issues, I mentioned, if any of your organizations have any interest, please, feel free to reach out directly to me. We would love for you to join our efforts, but just more generally too, we would love the collaboration. If there's anything we can do to amplify a message that you're promoting on the Hill or with the administration at the federal level, at the state level, we would be more than, happy to work with you and would really appreciate that collaboration.
Great. We can count on it. Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Randy. And I really appreciate all the presentation and discussion from our industry colleagues as well. I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to basically say, two things in terms of, continued activity by this patient community. And one is, do your best to insert yourself in all these different places that we've just talked about in terms of bringing more patient voice to bear, right? With regulators, with payers, with policymakers. And in conjunction with that, really continue to seek ways to educate and inform a broad array of patients, individual patients, right, about the environment and that's delivering their therapeutic and medical technology advances, right? Just that broader level of awareness, understanding makes for a better advocate, makes for a more informed patient who can really engage with manufacturers, for example, or be involved in advocacy activities. But my second piece is very, very much self-interested, which is please come back to me, please come find us, and we'd love to talk to you about the work we're doing, where you can get folks plugged in. For groups like those at the council, membership in our organization is very, very modest cost, and it gives access to everybody in your organization to participate in work groups and sit and participate in all the activities I talked about. So I'd love to follow up with anyone who's interested in that.
Terrific. Mark, call to action.
Yeah, I think the two health equity comments about health equity critical. I'd say the other two pieces, there are already work streams underway, with TSET. Again, as I said, there's already discussions. There's an open comment period here, but it's not just the administration. There's that bipartisan legislation. So I think the more we can have patient groups, physicians, others weigh in that a 5.7-year delay from FDA saying it's safe, product safe and effective to patients getting access is not an acceptable place for us to be in when it comes to access. And then going back to the EPA, the comment periods are over with the EPA, but members of Congress are absolutely hearing from a number of different stakeholders. And again, FDA is driving this. When the FDA is out there saying when one facility went down in 2019, it was problematic. If another two go down, it would be quote catastrophic. I mean, this is so. I think we'll certainly follow back up, Randy. But there are ways in which I think turnkey ways for folks to weigh in with their members of Congress on these two critical issues to ensure that patient access isn't adversely impacted.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I know, again, as I acknowledged earlier, all of you and your organizations have been active with the Health Council. I think there's more we can do. Talking points, having you weigh in, you're contributing to a range of our ability to take advocacy positions on things that are very specific to your industries, but also just important to the health and of individuals in the population. But let's make sure that we really are building that understanding of those specific experiences that are occurring within the medical device and technology space that may or may not be top of mind to someone who may be managing something that isn't quite at that stage or hasn't quite had the opportunity to talk to their clinician about how one of your products might help them lead a better life, a healthier life. That opportunity is still very much there for us. I also will just, before I turn and give Bruce the last word, the whole area of equity is a driver. The National Health Council has 4 strategic pillars right now, one of which is health equity and really helping to both optimize health for individuals and have it occur in a way that is equitable across the population. And all of our member companies are committed to that. I think you really brought some very good information and data forward that helps us understand how that issue could be a real unifying point of departure for any of these conversations as we talk to decision makers. So count on that, continuing. So Bruce, I'll come back to you. Even as you froze, I was getting comments in the chat saying, wow, powerful statement, a lot of agreement. I think the patient community understands how telling that story can really drive change that benefits a lot of people. And I'll give you the last word as we finish up today.
Well, I think the key with equity, back to facts, figures, and faces. When you look at the facts and the figures and you start understanding what is the impact the minority communities, and our focus is really diabetes. When you see the impact of access and the inability to access things in minority communities, by not taking action, it makes you complicit.
Right.
When I look at the impact of diabetes in pregnancy and what it does to minority women, I look at maternal mortality. If we don't do something, we're complicit. What I can tell you is we really don't know these communities.
Right.
We need to get into the community and have the communities tell us what their challenges are, and then try to figure out how then we might be able to help. Because having a Spanish translation is not being or having cultural humility to a Latino community.
Right.
We need to get in and understand what's their challenge. Some of it's cultural. And, how do we teach, coach, and train the providers, but also help with the community to understand, because trust is a huge barrier.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I think that you're speaking to kindred spirits. How do we operationalize and activate, that observation, that recommendation? One of the things that we're doing, you'll be hearing more about it through the Health Council. It really is just us playing a facilitating role with our member organizations and people that are, just so trusted and known to their respective communities. It's called Trusted Messengers. This particular campaign is focusing on social media, but we're really looking to help put people who have credibility, who have been there day in and day out on behalf of these patients, their caregivers and families, and create a direct dialogue to emphasize, bring some of these facts, these figures, these stories forward in a way that then really helps these patients advocate for themselves with their clinicians and the systems around them, but then also help educate a community to be more responsive. And won't it be good when we can start talking about the significant progress we've made toward addressing these equity issues, these disparities that are just beyond tragic and so completely preventable if we as a society take it on. So thank you all. I'm just so impressed with the participation we've had today. Our audience has been a little quieter than usual, but I've seen some nice reinforcing messages. I think that's because people were really in learning mode. And that just speaks to why we need to continue this conversation between that broader patient community represented in our membership and you as members that are doing so much great work in the medical device and technology space. So thank you all for participating today, and I'll look forward to building on this conversation with some real tangible and meaningful collaboration and bending that curve toward patient health and taking advantage of all the innovation that you all represent. So thank you so much and have a really good afternoon.
Thanks, Randy.